Hey guys, I know it's been a while since I posted a video, and today I have for you scripts, and more scripts. So whether you're working in Flow Designer, working with business rules, on the front end with Service Portal, or doing fixed scripts, there's a little bit of something for you. And don't worry, if you're not an advanced developer and you're relatively new to the platform, you will gain value out of watching this video. I hope you're as excited as I am, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel. And also, at the end of the video, if you did get something out of it, go ahead and click like. Let's take a look at a front-end record producer example where we have an additional email address that isn't necessarily tied to a user in the system. We're going to use this email address to send a notification to that email address to get to the record that is produced here on the front end. So you'll see that there's a couple of things that we need to do in Flow Designer to make this happen. This is a very simple flow that starts with Service Catalog. We'll notice that we have two emails being sent, which occur after we get the catalog variables from the record producer. So pretty straightforward. And then when we take a look at our send email rhythm URL, we'll see here that we're just basically bringing the variable into the to column. Now when we take a look at the notification, we're going to want to click on that icon in order to get the body to pop up. And next thing we'll see here is I'm bringing in the URL just to demonstrate how easy this is. We're going to take everything after the .com, including the /, and we're going to bring it into our script. First thing we're going to do is always remember to write return, because I always forget to type that. And the only thing that we're really adding here is the fd_trigger.requestItem.sysID, which is coming from our request item that has triggered this. So once again, I'll bring in the URL again just to show you that we even use the view at the very end. If you notice in line 8, you'll see that the view equals SP, so we can basically send the user or whoever's on the other end of that email address to the front end. Next, we'll take a look at the request version. Basically, I'm just bringing in .request.sysID, and this will take them to the front end to be able to view the requests. So either way, request or request item, we have both of those scripted out. We could even put both of them in the same send email action if we wanted to. Now let's go and test our flow. So we're going to navigate up to click on the test UI action. Test flow window will pop up. We'll populate it with the request item. Now you'll see this URL pop up telling us that the test is finished running, and we can view the execution details. We'll navigate down to send email. It'll bring up this window, and we will click on the email sysID. That'll bring up this window right here, and then we can click on open record, and that will bring us into the email. We'll navigate down and click on the preview email UI action. And at this point, we'll be able to click on the link from here, and it'll bring us to the rhythm. And we can also take a look at the request, but we're not going to. I'm going to save some time for you, but you can do the same thing with the request at your own leisure. Now on to fixed scripts. We have two examples here. One is to delete emails on the sysemail table, and another one is to change the location of several CIs. We'll get into how to either update or delete multiple records on a table in just a second. Here's our first example, which is to delete emails. If we take a look at line 2, we'll see that we're pointing to the sys_email table. On line 3, we're performing an encoded query, which is saying if the recipient equals itam@example.com, then we want to delete multiple. The action's taken place on line 5, that's where you see the delete multiple. I also put in something on line 4 in case you're an old schooler, or if you prefer just using add query. Now we'll take a look at the email table, and we'll get an encoded query by clicking on Show Matching. So we have to right click on the column, click Show Matching. Once we do that, then it will be filtered for us. So we want the list to be filtered first, and then once we have a filtered list, then we can navigate to the filter, right click on the value. So in this case it would be recipients equals jasonexample.com. Once we right click, we'll see the copy query option. We can select it and then navigate back to the script, and in this example we can plop it into line 3. Now we'll move on to the change CI location fix script. Here on line 1 we're pointing this at the CMDB CI table. In line 3 we're looking at the sysid for Miami, which is looking at the location field. So let's note that that's a reference field. That's why we have it equal to a sysid. We'll run the query on line 5, and then 7 is our loop, and in 9 we're saying replace it with Miami. And once again, we're going to use the sysid for the location Miami because location is referenced in the CMDB CI table, so it's pointing to another table. Therefore, we have to use the sysid. We don't have to, but it's more convenient to do it this way. Lines 11, 12, and 13, we're basically saying don't run the workflow, force the update, and make sure that there are no, fingerprints are being left, meaning that the updated and updated by will not change. And then on 15, we want to make sure we don't forget jm.update. Also, before I forget, line 1 is where we define jm. Let's take a look at 2 business rules which I've created. One is on a custom table called Squid Bets, and another one is on the incident table. The Squid Bets business rule is a typical insert or update business rule, whereas the incident query is just a standard query business rule, and we'll get into the script in just a second. We can see the differences between the two. When we look at the incident query business rule, we'll see here the query checkbox is checked. We're running it before the query because obviously we don't want to run it after, because then it'll be too late for the conditions to take effect. Navigate to the Actions tab where we'll see nothing going on, and now to the main event, the Advanced tab, where we'll see here in line 3, if you're an admin, the business rule essentially is not going to run, so you're going to be able to see everything in the table. Looking at line 7, we'll see here we have 3 conditions. The user session is interactive if they don't have an admin role, and if they're a member of Squid Players. Then in lines 8 and 9 we define a couple of variables, who the user is, and then we're also getting their groups, and then we're going to run a query starting with line 10 saying if the user is in the assigned to box, or if they're a member of the assignment group on line 11, and lastly if they're in the caller ID box, then those conditions will apply to them, and that means that those are the records that they're going to see in the incident table. Then looking at line 14, something kind of similar, except we're applying it to a specific group called Aspen user. So if you're a member of that group, lines 15 and 16, we're doing basically the same thing. We're defining who the user is and also what groups they're a member of. We're saying go ahead and get their groups, and then we're going to start our query on line 17. If they're in the assigned to box, if the assignment group is one of theirs on line 18, if the watch list contains their user ID. On line 19, if there's a user which is a VIP, so that could be any user that's a VIP in the caller box. And then line 21, if their ID, meaning the users, is in the caller ID box, they'll be able to see those incidents. Let's take a brief look at the groups. We have Aspen users and Squid players, which virtually have the same roles with differing members. And we'll see here, this is me looking at the incident table. We have 68 incidents, and now we're going to impersonate Aspen user. And what we'll find here when we go to incidents is that we have the first one that's assigned to a group that Aspen user is a member of. Then we have 2 VIPs, and last but not least, Aspen user is in the watch list. So it met all the conditions. And now when we impersonate Squidbait, they'll come into the incident and they'll see 2 records. Both are assigned to them at the group level. So they are a member of the Squid players group. We'll end the impersonation. And now we can move on to the next business rule, which is preventing duplicate records. We'll notice here that our when to run is before insert or update. In actions, we have nothing. And then here in the advanced tab, we'll see here that we're running it on the same exact table. So Squid bets, you'll see there in line 4, and then we're basically running a couple of different queries. So if the round is the same, if the game is the same, if the player is the same, VIP is the same, then we're going to say, okay, let's prevent the creation of that record. And what better way to test that than to go to a current record? We'll open one up, and we're just going to try and insert and stay. And when we do that, we'll see here an invalid update, and the error message, which we had put in the business rule, will display. Now let's change the player, and we'll set that result to none. We'll try it again, and we'll see here we had the same issue because there was another record that had that same combination of elements there. So what we'll do now is we'll go in and we'll create a fresh record, hopefully one that does not have any of these values, which are all the same. And we'll go ahead and create a new round just to make sure we have a new data point here that is not contained in any of the records. Just go through the motions and add a couple of data points here to the record. Now it's a brand new round, so there should not be any other records with the same values. Now we'll hit insert and stay. And voila, it worked. So our business rule is functioning as intended. We're not creating any duplicates on this table with the defined conditions that were in the advanced script. Okay, let's navigate back to the front end, and we're going to do a couple things with putting in the default user. For example, you'll see my name pop up there, and the affected user matches the upper right hand corner. And then we're also going to do some filtering, category, subcategory, kind of like you see here on the incident record, where when we change the category to database, for example, you'll see only 3 selections instead of everything that is out there in the universe within the sys choice table. So that's our first snippet there. The get user ID, you're probably familiar with that. Basically, it's a reference field, and then we just put that little snippet in there in the default value. That means that on load, the current user who is looking at the form is going to be the one that's populating that box. Next, we'll take a look at category, and what we're doing is running the choices off the sys choice table. So we're looking it up directly from there. Now, I know this is not best practice. You're not supposed to do that. If we put in a reference qualifier, we'll see here that we limit the categories by putting in the table name and the element equals category parameter. Next, we can go to the subcategory. Here we're going to say if the variable category is not empty, then we're going to run a query where the name equals incident. Also, we'll notice that the dependent value has to equal the category. So as you can see here, when we go to sys choice, we'll take a look briefly at the category, but the subcategory, that's where our dependent values are listed. So your dependent value has to equal the category. And then when we navigate back to the front end, we'll see how the filtering works, just as it does in the incident table on the back end. And we'll take one last look at our reference qualifier here. I must have used this, I don't know, at least 100 times over the last 5 years. So it's a nice little script to have in your back pocket. Last thing we'll look at is a little script here to set the default on the email variable to the user's email. So we'll take a look at my profile. That's my email address. And then when we go to the front end, we're going to just reload the page and make sure that the email address for me loads there. Now let's shift gears a little bit and take a look at an onChange client script. We'll see the type is onChange, the UI type is all, which covers Service Portal, and pay attention to get reference and JM1, which is the function that we call in the next line on line 6. So you notice that JM1 and then JM in parentheses on line 6. We'll look at the profile we're pulling from, Pigface. So at this point, we'll reload our screen and then change the value of the VIP from Jason Aspin to Pigface. Now we can see it works. Jason Aspin does not have an email, so nothing will populate. So what I'm going to do is hit the information icon and just add one there. Add the email address. Now we can do another change. Pigface comes in, and now Jason Aspin's email address comes in. And it's just that simple. We can also do this with other elements coming from any profile using that same methodology. Next thing we're going to look at is a calculation that's run in Flow Designer. So we're going to have a little bit of scripting, but we're going to have Flow Designer do a lot of the work for us. So basically what we're doing is we're taking all the child records in the bets table and then populating the squid VIP table with the overall amount. So it's basically going to be a calculation where we calculate the winnings first, then we're going to look up how much they lost, and then we're going to say one minus the other. So as you see here, our first step is to trigger it off of whenever there's a new line item put in the table, and then we're going to look up all the records on the squid bets table that are 1 first. So whenever the result is 1, then we're going to say, okay, off the trigger from that same table, squid bets, let's look up that same VIP whose record triggered this, and then we're going to calculate the totals. We created an action to do this. So if we go inside the action, that's where everything is happening in terms of the scripting. Next thing we'll look at is basically, you'll notice it's the same construct except the result is lost. So what does that mean? That means that how much money they have actually accumulated in losses. So we're going to use the same action to do that calculation. Here we'll look up the VIP based on the sysid and the trigger record. And next we'll update the actual VIP record winnings field. So if we take a look here, we have lines 7 and 8 where we're just basically pulling down that variable or referencing it, and then all the magic happens in the last line item, which is line item 9, saying, okay, this minus this, essentially. So we're running 2 calculations, and then we're just subtracting one from the other, to get the total amount. Now we'll take a look at the action, look at our inputs here. We're pointing to the squid bets table through the records function. So we'll type in another one. We'll do it from scratch, basically, just to show you. You're going to type in records, then you're going to find your table, and that's all you're going to set for a variable in this example. Now, we'll drag the pill over to value. We're going to create another input variable here called SB. On our first line item, we're just going to define a variable called JM and make it equal 0. Then we're going to run a while loop, and notice we have inputs.sb.next in there on line item 5. Then we're going to say, okay, what's the wager? So that's the field name right there. Notice how we go back here to the table to say, okay, wager, here's the column, right? So you can visualize it there. And then our outputs.jm1, jm1 is our output variable which we've created, which is a decimal. So just be careful of the type. And then we're going to say it equals jm. So it's going to run that loop, calculate everything, spit out the value, and then it's going to be a decimal. Then we'll notice here on our outputs, what we've done is we've dragged the script step there into the actual record. So that's how we created it right there with our label and name. Make sure it's the same type, so it has to be decimal. If your output variable is different, you'll probably get an error. Once again, just a little look at the actual actions here. It's the same action we're running twice, so we're able to leverage the same action twice in the same flow. So, and there are probably other ways to do this. I'm sure there are many other ways, but this seemed like a simple way to come up with the value, or the aggregate, if you will. And then here we'll just type in fd_data dot, and you'll notice that the picker is going to pop up, so that way you know you have the correct values. Okay, notice return here, right? We're returning jm2. You must have that in there. So just get in the habit of typing in return whenever you're doing inline scripting within Flow Designer. And here, let's just go ahead and change the value, and you'll notice that winnings are changing at the top, right? So the amount in there is changing, and we'll run it a couple times here. And it might take a couple of seconds because, again, Flow Designer, it does run asynchronously. So sometimes you'll see it's it'll take a couple of seconds. So if you're looking at it real time on the screen, it might not be this fast. So you might have to even refresh your screen. And once again, a look at our conditions here. Wager changes and result is not none. And one reason I like scripting in Flow Designer as opposed to pulling down the pills all the time is that if you decide to change your trigger action, for example, from created to created or updated, Flow Designer will wipe out all of the rest of the flow. So wherever those pills are, it'll wipe those out too. Well, it looks like this is working fine. The flows are running every time I change the related list there and the record. So moving on, just want to say thank you. If you learned something, go ahead and click like, and don't forget to subscribe.